The millionaire dad I worked for took me to his company GALA. Then I did something that shocked everyone. Welcome back with a new real shock story. Before we start, comment and tell me which city you're watching from. At the end, don't forget to subscribe and rate it from 0 to 10. Let's enjoy the story, everyone.
I never thought a single night could change the way people looked at me, or the way I looked at myself. My name is Alec Rose, and for years I lived a life that most people wouldn't even notice if they walked right past me. I was the nanny, the quiet shadow in the background of a wealthy family's perfect picture. I woke up before everyone else, made breakfast for children who weren't mine, cleaned up toys scattered across the floor, and put little ones to sleep, while the world outside admired their parents' shining success. It wasn't a bad life, but it wasn't mine either. I lived inside walls that weren't truly mine, walked halls filled with voices that didn't include me, and laughed only when no one else was watching. My world was routine, safe, steady, invisible, and for a long time, I thought that was enough. But deep down, I always knew there was something fragile about that safety. I knew that no matter how much love the children gave me, no matter how much I poured my heart into their little lives, I was still just the nanny. To most people, I was just a name on the edge of a paycheck, someone who kept the house in order so the family could shine. That night, oh God, that night, everything shifted. It started with an invitation I never expected. The CEO, my employer, told me he wanted me to come to the company gala with him. A gala. Can you imagine? I thought he was joking at first. I mean, why me? People like me don't belong in places like that. But he was serious. He said I had been there for his children more than anyone else, and he wanted me to be recognized. I still remember standing in front of the mirror that evening, staring at myself in a simple dress I could barely afford. My hands shook as I tried to brush my hair smooth, telling myself over and over, "You don't belong there, but you have to go." My heart pounded in my chest, as if it already knew what it was waiting for me. The ride to the gala was quiet. I stared out the car window as city lights blurred into streaks, my stomach twisted in knots. I kept wondering, what will they think when they see me? Will they laugh? Will they ask who I am? I tried to silence the thoughts, but they only grew louder the closer we got. And then, we arrived. The building shimmered with lights, tall glass windows glowing like fire. Inside, I could hear music, violins, soft chatter, laughter that sounded too perfect. My feet felt heavy, but I followed him in, my palms sweaty, my throat dry. The moment I stepped into that grand hall, everything slowed. Crystal chandeliers glittered above me, long gowns swept across the floor, and diamonds sparkled at every corner. But it wasn't the beauty that caught me. It was the eyes, dozens of them, all turning at once, staring straight at me. Whispers started instantly. I could almost hear the words carried through the air. Who is she? Why would he bring her? Their looks weren't curious, they were cutting. Some smiled politely, but their eyes betrayed them. Others didn't bother hiding it. They looked at me as if I had stepped into the wrong movie, walked onto the wrong stage. I felt small, so small. I wanted to disappear. Every step I took beside him felt like dragging chains across a polished floor. I clutched my purse tightly, praying the music would drown out the sound of my pounding heart. But the whispers followed me. They stuck to my skin like smoke. A woman's laugh echoed behind me, sharp, mocking. A man whispered to his companion, his eyes fixed on me. A nanny? At this table? He didn't even bother lowering his voice. I tried to hold my head up, to smile, to pretend I didn't hear. But the truth was, I heard everything. And every word felt like a stone, weighing heavier and heavier on my chest. The CEO stood tall beside me, shaking hands, introducing me with the same respect he gave anyone else. But no matter how kind his words were, they couldn't shield me from the sting of being unwanted. And yet, I stayed. I didn't walk away. Something inside me told me to keep standing there, even as the stares grew sharper, even as the whispers grew louder. What I didn't know then was that this night wasn't going to break me. It was going to reveal something inside me I never thought I had. Something the entire room would soon witness. Something that would silence them all. I remember standing there, the music echoing through the grand hall, the whispers circling me like smoke. I told myself to breathe, to stay calm, but it felt like every eye in that room was peeling away a piece of me. I wanted to vanish into the shadows, but something inside me whispered, "Don't move. Don't let them see you break." I tried to focus on the children's faces in my memory, the way they laughed when I read them bedtime stories, the way they clung to me when they were scared. That thought gave me strength. Still, the weight of judgment pressed harder with every second. The CEO led me deeper into the crowd, his voice steady as he introduced me. But his words felt like sparks thrown into water. They fizzled out the moment they touched the air, drowned by the whispers and stares around us. I knew exactly what they were thinking. To them, I was nothing more than a worker, a helper who had somehow stumbled into their world of glitter and power. And then it happened. A woman in a silver gown, dripping in diamonds, stepped closer. Her perfume was strong, almost suffocating, and her smile looked sharp enough to cut. She leaned in, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, and said, "This is not the place for people like her." The words pierced me like glass. My chest tightened, my throat closed. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I heard gasps, small laughs, even the clink of glasses, as if people were waiting to see what I would do. I froze. My hands trembled at my side. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to turn around and leave, to escape those eyes burning into me. But then I felt something shift inside. Years of swallowing words, of keeping my head down, of being invisible. They all rushed to the surface. I straightened my back. My heart was pounding, but I lifted my chin. For the first time in that room, I wasn't shrinking. I looked around, straight into the eyes of those who mocked me, and I realized something powerful. They only had power because I allowed them to. I didn't speak yet. Not then. Instead, I stayed silent, letting my presence answer their cruelty. The silence grew heavy, and for a moment, the music, the laughter, the clinking glasses, all of it faded. It was just me, standing there, refusing to bow. But the storm wasn't over. Later in the evening, as we moved closer to the dining tables, I heard it again. Another voice, this time from a man with a glass of champagne in his hand. His tone dripped with mockery. "A nanny? At this table? Really?" The words stabbed deeper than before. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, not from shame, but from fire. My heart raced, my stomach twisted, and for a moment I wondered if I would collapse under the weight of their scorn. But no, I couldn't, not this time. Something stronger than fear held me up. The CEO's eyes flickered toward me, a look of quiet support, but he said nothing. This wasn't his battle. It was mine, and I knew it. As I sat down at the table, surrounded by polished silverware and crystal glasses, the tension thickened. People around me whispered as though I couldn't hear them. They made sure I would hear them. Every laugh felt aimed at me. Every glance sliced through my skin. I gripped the edge of the tablecloth, forcing myself to stay calm. I wanted to scream, to shout, to tell them everything they were doing was wrong. But my voice stayed locked inside, waiting for the right moment. And then came that moment. The woman in silver leaned toward another guest, her voice just loud enough to carry. "She probably doesn't even know how to hold a glass at a gala." Laughter followed, harsh and cruel. That was it. Something inside me snapped, not in anger, but in strength. I looked around at the faces that had laughed at me, the faces that had whispered, and I knew I couldn't keep silly and any longer. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my chest. My palms were sweaty, but my voice came out steady, clear and louder than I expected. And with that voice, I prepared to say something that would shake the entire room to its core. My voice cut through the noise like a blade. The room fell silent, every laugh dying in the air, every whisper freezing mid-breath. All those glittering eyes, those polished faces turned toward me as though they couldn't believe what they had just heard. For a heartbeat, I thought I had gone too far. My chest rose and fell quickly, the sound of my own breathing loud in my ears. But then I realized something. They were listening. For the first time that night, they weren't laughing. They weren't whispering. They were waiting. "I may not belong to your world of diamonds and silk," I said, my voice steady though my hands shook under the table. "But I know what it means to belong where it truly matters, inside a family, in the lives of children who love without judgment." Gasps fluttered across the table like startled birds. Some faces hardened, others softened with surprise. My words weren't fancy. They weren't dressed in expensive language. They were raw, honest, pulled straight from the bruises on my heart. I continued. "You look at me and see a servant, a helper, someone beneath you. But when your laughter fades, when the lights of this hall go out, what are you left with? Empty glasses, empty words. I may not wear jewels, but I carry something you'll never touch. Love that is real, loyalty that is earned, and the strength of surviving nights darker than this one." My throat burned, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The silver-gowned woman's smile cracked, her lips trembling as if my words had sliced through her polished shield. The man with the champagne glass shifted uncomfortably, lowering his drink. Around us, the whispers didn't return. Not this time. I felt taller, stronger, like the weight that had been crushing me for years was finally crumbling away. For so long, I had let others define my worth, shape my place, silence my voice. But not anymore. Not here. Not now. The CEO's eyes met mine across the table, and for a moment, there was no noise, no judgment, just a quiet flicker of respect. I saw it, clear and undeniable. It was as though he was silently telling me, "You did it. You found your voice." But the battle wasn't over. One of the older men at the table cleared his throat, his tone sharp. "That's a pretty speech, girl, but words don't change what you are." His statement cracked through the silence like a whip. Some guests nodded slightly, as if reassured by his attempt to put me back in my place. I felt the sting, but this time I didn't falter. I looked straight at him and answered, "You're right. Words alone don't change who I am, but neither do your labels. I know who I am, and I don't need your permission to exist." The room shifted again. This time the silence wasn't heavy with judgment. It was heavy with realization. Some people avoided my gaze, ashamed. Others stared at me with a kind of curiosity, as though they were seeing me for the first time. And somewhere in the crowd, I heard it, a single clap, slow, strong, certain. It came from the CEO. His hands met together once, twice, 3 times, and then, as if carried by invisible current, others joined. The sound grew, echoing through the hall, shattering the weight of the earlier whispers. Applause. For me. I couldn't believe it. My chest swelled. Tears stung my eyes. And for the first time that night, I felt like I wasn't drowning. I was rising. But even in that applause, I knew the truth. Not everyone clapped. Not everyone accepted me. And maybe they never would. But it didn't matter anymore. Because I had finally accepted myself. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't weak. I was Alec Rose, and they were going to remember my name. When the applause finally faded, I thought just maybe, I had broken through the wall that always stood between me and them. My heart was still pounding in my chest, and my hands trembled against the tablecloth. But for the first time, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. But then came the silence. Not the heavy silence of judgment. No, it was sharper, colder, like the kind of silence that comes before a storm. I could feel it in the air, the shift in energy. Faces turned toward each other. Whispers slithered again, not as cruel as before, but filled with unease. And then, she stood up. The woman in the silver gown. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she pushed back her chair and let her wine glass rest gently on the table. Her eyes locked on mine, and her smile returned. But it wasn't the playful, mocking smile from before. No, this one was tighter, calculated, dangerous. "You've got spirit," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room. "But spirit doesn't change where you came from, and it certainly doesn't buy you a seat at this table." Her words stung, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. My voice might have shaken before, but now it was steady. "I don't need to buy a seat," I replied. "I earned it. Maybe not by your rules, but by surviving things you wouldn't last a single day in." A murmur rolled through the room, half shocked, half curious. I could see some of the younger guests leaning forward, their eyes wide, as if they wanted me to keep going. But the silver-gowned woman tilted her head, her smile deepening. "And what exactly," she asked sweetly, "did you survive?" Her tone dripped with challenge, daring me to expose myself, to open my scars for her amusement. I froze, my throat tightening. The memories rushed back. The dark nights, the empty stomachs, the cold stares, the constant reminder that I was never enough. I could feel my hands clenching under the table, nails digging into my palms. Every instinct told me to stay quiet, to protect myself. But then, I remembered the applause. I remembered the CEO's eyes, filled with respect. I remembered the sound of my own voice breaking through the silence. So I spoke. "I survived being told I was worthless," I said, my words low but strong. "I survived being laughed at when I had nothing. I survived being invisible, ignored, treated like dirt. And still, I'm here, still breathing, still standing. You can take away my clothes, my money, my place at this table. But you can't take away my strength. You can't erase my story." The hall went quiet again. But this time, it wasn't the suffocating silence. It was the kind that pulls people in, the kind that makes them listen. The silver-gowned woman's smile faltered, just for a second, and I saw it, the crack in her armor. She wasn't untouchable. My truth had reached her, even if she'd never admit it. But before anyone could speak, a sudden sound broke through the tension. A slow clap. Not from the CEO this time. From the far corner of the room, where a young woman stood, her dress plain compared to the others, her eyes glistening with tears. She clapped once, then twice, then faster. Soon, others joined. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to make the silver-gowned woman's smile finally vanish. I felt a rush of warmth flood my chest. My eyes burned with unshed tears, but I held them back. I wouldn't cry. Not here. Not now. Because for the first time, I realized something I had never dared to believe before. I wasn't fighting alone anymore. The clapping faded, but its echo lingered inside me like a steady heartbeat. For a moment, I felt untouchable, as if my words had carved a small space for me in that cold, glittering hall. But the feeling didn't last. Because when I looked back at the table, I saw their faces again. Half of them were blank, hiding behind polite smiles. The other half, sharper, tighter, eyes narrowed like knives. I realized something then. Winning a few hearts didn't mean the war was over. The woman in silver sat back down, her lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't need to speak anymore. Her silence was enough. A warning, a promise that this wasn't finished. And she wasn't the only one. I could feel the weight of judgment settling on me from all directions. I tried to breathe, to steady myself, but my chest felt heavy. Every beat of my heart seemed louder than the chatter around me. My fork trembled against the plate, and suddenly the lights felt too bright, the room too crowded. I wasn't sure if I was still being applauded or silently torn apart. Then, just when I thought I could slip into the shadows and disappear, the CEO's voice cut through the noise. "Enough," he said, not loud, but sharp enough to freeze the room. All eyes turned to him. He stood slowly, his gaze sweeping across the faces at the table, then landing on me. For the first time that night, his expression wasn't just kind, it was fierce. "This woman," he said firmly, "has shown more strength and courage tonight than most of you will show in your entire lives." My breath caught in my throat. I didn't expect him to defend me. Not like this. She was mocked, pushed, cornered, and she stood her ground. Do you know what that is? That is leadership. That is resilience. That is the spirit this company, this country, desperately needs. A murmur rippled across the room, louder than before. I could see some of the guests shifting uncomfortably, their carefully built masks cracking. But others looked at me with something new in their eyes. Respect, curiosity, maybe even admiration. For a second, I wanted to collapse into my chair, to let the relief wash over me. But I knew better. This wasn't the end. It was just another beginning. Because even as the CEO's words echoed, I noticed something strange. At the far end of the room, near the entrance, 2 men stood. They weren't dressed like the others. No tuxedos, no shining shoes. Their suits were plain, almost too plain. Their eyes sharp and blinking. They didn't clap. They didn't smile. They just watched. A chill ran down my spine. Who were they? And why did it feel like they weren't here for the gala? But for me? The celebration moved on around me. Music rising again. Glasses clinking. Laughter forced. but I couldn't shake the feeling of those eyes following me. Every step I took, every breath, they were there. I thought maybe it was paranoia, my nerves still raw from everything that had happened. But then, as I moved toward the edge of the hall to catch my breath, I saw it. One of the men raised his hand slightly, just enough to press a finger to his earpiece. And then he whispered something. My stomach dropped. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Because in that moment, standing in the glow of chandeliers and polite applause, I realized the truth. What I had just survived inside this hall was nothing compared to what waited for me outside of it. The air inside the hall was thick, but it was nothing compared to what I felt when I caught the eyes of those two men again. Their stares didn't waver, cold and deliberate, like hunters watching their prey. I told myself not to panic, not to let my fear show, but my body betrayed me. My hands were trembling, my breath uneven. The CEO leaned closer, his voice low. "You okay?" I nodded quickly, forcing a smile, but my heart knew the truth. I wasn't okay. Something was wrong. Something bigger than the whispers, bigger than the humiliation, bigger even than the cruel woman in silver. As the music swelled, I tried to blend into the crowd, but my instincts screamed at me that I was being followed. I slipped past a group of laughing guests, their champagne glasses sparkling under the chandeliers, and headed toward the corridor that led to the side exit. The sound of my heels echoed against the marble floor, and with every step, the weight in my chest grew heavier. Way down the hall, I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, steady, deliberate. I quickened my pace. The footsteps quickened too. By the time I reached the dimly lit side door, my heart was pounding so loudly I thought the entire building could hear it. I pulled the handle, but it didn't budge. Locked. Panic surged through me. I spun around, and there they were. The two men, standing only a few steps away. "Miss Rose," one of them said calmly, his voice smooth but unnervingly firm. "We need to have a word." My throat went dry. Who are you?" They didn't answer. Instead, one of them reached into his coat. I froze. My entire body stiffened, my breath caught in my lungs. In that instant, every memory of being powerless, of being cornered and small, came flooding back. But this time, I wasn't a child. This time, I couldn't just let fear swallow me whole. So I did the only thing I could. I ran. The corridor stretched ahead of me like a tunnel, each step echoing like a gunshot in my ears. I heard them behind me, their heavy footsteps pounding against the floor. My lungs burned, my vision blurred, but I didn't stop. I burst back into the main hall, the glittering gala still in full swing. Music blared, laughter echoed. No one noticed the terror etched across my face. I pushed through the crowd, desperate to reach the CEO, desperate for someone, anyone, to see what was happening. But when I looked toward the table where he had stood before, he was gone. My stomach dropped. "Move!" One of the men barked behind me, his voice slicing through the chaos. People turned, startled. But before they could process what was happening, I stumbled onto the stage where the band had just finished their set. The microphone stood there, gleaming under the lights, and without thinking, I grabbed it. "Help me!" I screamed, my voice shaking through the speakers. "They're after me!" Gasps erupted across the hall. Heads snapped in my direction. For a moment, I thought I had finally broken through, that someone would come to my rescue. But then I saw her. The woman in silver. She stood near the center of the room, her arms crossed, a smile slowly curling across her lips. Not mocking this time, not cruel, but satisfied, as if this had all been part of her plan. The two men reached the edge of the stage, their eyes locked on me. My chest tightened, my voice caught in my throat. I clung to the microphone stand like it was the only thing tethering me to life. The crowd erupted in confusion, some shouting, some whispering, some pulling out their phones. The room spun, lights blurring into streaks of gold and white. And then, just as one of the men reached for me, a voice thundered through the speakers. "Enough!" The CEO appeared at the edge of the stage, his face like stone, his presence commanding the entire room. The men froze, their hands suspended mid-air. "She's with me," he said, his voice booming. "And if anyone here dares touch her again, you'll answer to me." For a heartbeat, the world stood still. The men exchanged a look, then slowly stepped back, retreating into the shadows of the hall. The crowd buzzed with nervous energy, whispers rising like wildfire. I stood there, trembling, tears stinging my eyes, my chest heaving with every breath. The microphone slipped from my hand and clattered against the floor. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about me being mocked, or humiliated, or underestimated. It was bigger, darker. Someone wanted me silenced, and they weren't finished yet. The room was still trembling from the echoes of the CEO's words. The two men had melted into the shadows, but their presence still clung to me like smoke after a fire. My body shook, my chest heaving, but I refused to collapse. Not in front of them, not in front of anyone. The CEO stepped closer, his hand hovering just near my shoulder, not touching, not forcing, but offering. For a moment, I wanted to ache it. I wanted to let someone else carry the weight I'd been dragging for so long. But something inside me whispered that I had to stand on my own. So, I straightened. The hall was silent now. Hundreds of eyes on me. Some were filled with pity, others with suspicion, but a few, just a few, held something I hadn't expected. Admiration, respect. My voice trembled at first, but I forced it to rise above the fear. "You all saw it," I said, my words echoing through the microphone. "You saw how quickly I was singled out, cornered, silenced. All because I didn't fit the image you wanted. All because I wasn't one of you." Whispers rippled across the hall. I came here tonight as a guest. I came here hoping to prove that people like me could belong in places like this. But instead, I was reminded of what so many already know, that no matter how hard we fight, no matter how much we survive, the world will always try to push us back down. My throat tightened, but I didn't stop. But I will not be pushed down anymore, and neither should anyone else who has ever been made to feel small, invisible, or unworthy. I looked across the room at the woman in silver. Her smile was gone now, replaced by something harder, colder. For once, she wasn't in control. "This isn't just my story," I continued. "It's the story of millions who are judged not for who they are, but for what they are, judged by skin, by class, by circumstance. Tonight, you tried to remind me of my place. But let me remind you of something too. Our place is wherever we choose to stand. And no one, no whispers, no stares, no threats, can take that from us." The silence that followed was heavy, but not empty. It was alive, charged, as if every person in the room was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Then, slowly, someone clapped. Not the CEO this time. Not one of the powerful men in tuxedos. It was the young woman from before, the one in the simple dress. She clapped, tears shining in her eyes, and this time, she wasn't alone. One by one, others joined her, and their applause rising like a wave. Not everyone clapped. Some sat frozen, their faces tight, their silence louder than words. But it didn't matter, because in that moment, I wasn't invisible anymore. The applause washed over me, and for the first time, it didn't feel like noise. It felt like recognition. But as the sound filled the hall, I couldn't ignore the truth pressing against my chest. This wasn't the end. Those men hadn't disappeared. They'd simply stepped back. And the woman in silver hadn't lost. People like her never gave up their power so easily. I knew the road ahead would be dangerous, harder even than the one that brought me here. But I also knew something else. I wasn't the same girl who had walked into this gala, clutching the edges of her borrowed dress and hoping not to be noticed. I was different now. I was unafraid. That night didn't just change how others saw me, it changed how I saw myself. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to light a fire that could never be put out. I stepped back from the microphone, my voice still echoing in the silence that followed. My heart was heavy, but my spirit was lighter than it had ever been. This wasn't just survival anymore. This was the beginning of something bigger. So, I'll ask you this. How many more stories like mine will it take before the world finally listens? How many more voices will have to rise, trembling but unbroken, before the silence is shattered for good? Because one day, it won't just be me on this stage, it will be all of us. And when that day comes, no one will be able to look away.